Hi, everyone. Good evening. Carl Steinbeck here, covering day 20 of the Massachusetts Commonwealth versus Karen Reed. It's a murder case there in Denham, Massachusetts. And today was another day of the prosecution calling witnesses, and another day the prosecutor and lead prosecutor and his sidekick, they still can't get this case off the ground. They're still treading water and they're drowning every day. It gets worse and worse. They just don't have it their act together, and they're running out of time. It's as I've been saying, it's been game over. They've had too many critical failures. They don't have the kind of attorney skills that are needed to win a case that's really a tough case to win. And here they don't have the facts that make it a winnable case. And so you have that, as well as their tactics that they're using, especially by Attorney Brennan. And so his tactics and manner of style in the courtroom are actually alienating the jury. And so it's actually a worse case for the prosecution, because they don't have the credibility in front of the jury. They keep on bringing up stuff that either is irrelevant or else it's helpful to Karen Reed. And so let's go ahead and talk about how the day went. So we had a 40-minute delay here because the judge, we'll get right into that. The judge had something to say to the jurors here. Fan, I guess the fan isn't turning. All right, here we go. Oh no, I went to the wrong spot. Hold on. To the 40-minute.
Seated.
Good morning, jurors. So an issue has come to my attention that is going to make it necessary that I talk to each one of you individually over at sidebar with counsel. So that process will take a little while. So I'm going to don't speculate as to what I'm going to talk to you about. Please, when you go back to the deliberation room, talk about anything but this case, and I'll see each of you individually. And the process may take time. The cameras will be shut off, and I'm going to talk to the lawyers about whether no filming. All right, send you back, and we'll go back. Thank you very much.
All right, so
now
something was reported. I think what likely happened is one of the jurors complained about one of the other jurors, and one juror complained about a couple of jurors. Apparently there's a younger guy talking to a gal a lot, and that even happened down there in Tallahassee with Charlie Adelson, where one of the male jurors seemed to be talking a lot or making body language communication with a female juror. And so we sort of might have that same thing going on here. So one-on-one, they took them out from the jury deliberation room. They completely cleared out the entire courtroom there, and they even moved everybody, all the spectators, media, they moved them out of even the second floor there. So they didn't want any of this getting leaked to the public, which is somewhat common in these kind of cases when you have international media covering this. So let's jump ahead. $204 here.
All right, so jurors, I still have a couple of questions for you. Were you able to follow the instructions and refrain from doing any independent research or investigation into this case? And we've discussed.
So what happened is they moved this one male. I guess he was like seated in a different spot, and they moved him. Now he's like closest to the witness box. And Joey Morrison, a report on court TV, said seat one juror was moved to the back row. Yeah, they did a shuffling of two different jurors. So that's why it must be some kind of complaint of a juror member where somebody's always talking and they're not supposed to be talking about the case. So this also leads me to
That's
believe
the
that's the case
two
based on what she
questions.
says
I
here.
do need to stress for you that it's very, very important that no one discuss this case. Don't let anyone talk to you about the case, no comments about the case. You've seen how hard the lawyers have worked to pull this case together for you, and everybody's given it so much time. So please, let's make sure that we follow that. That means each other. So with that, I know we're late getting started. We're going to take an abbreviated lunch today, only 30 minutes, and abbreviated breaks. So no.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This case is so crazy. So of course the jurors want to talk about it. They can't talk about when they leave the courthouse. They want to talk about it with each other. So it's very tempting. And so that's why I'm sure some other jurors saying, hey, these guys are talking, they shouldn't be talking. And so the judge's remedy, after figuring out who's doing talking, they're deciding to shuffle them around.
No morning break. We're going to start now and go to the 1. All right, Mr. Brennan, and we're taking a witness out of order. I apologize. We've got a witness here. Sometimes
So
we take
Christina
witnesses out of
Hanley,
order.
she's
Ms.
not
Hanley will be back later for the rest of her testimony. But we've got a
starting out the
witness
day
here
from
that
yesterday,
we'll
but
call
she's
out.
going to be called
Thank you.
later.
Mr.
So
Brennan,
instead,
thanks.
Thank you, Your Honor. The Commonwealth calls Dr. Wolf.
he sounds so loud and confident. He's very misguided. He thinks this guy is going to save his case. So I'm going to cover the direct on this because the cross was only like less than 7 minutes.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
His direct was quite interesting.
Good morning, doctor.
Good morning.
All right, whenever you're ready, Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spell your first name and last name for the court reporter?
Sure. My first name is Isaac, Aizik. It's phonetic. Last name is Wolf, WOLF, like the real thing.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a brain surgeon.
Is there a special part of medicine that you study?
Well, my main interest in brain surgery is brain tumors and trigeminal neuralgia. But I also specialize in movement disorders. I do pediatrics and adults.
Are you an active working neurosurgeon?
I am very active working neurosurgeon. I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning to go to work, 5 days a week. I take call 300 days out of 365 days a year.
Did you work yesterday?
Yes, I did.
What type of work did you do yesterday?
I did 2 brain surgeries yesterday.
Are you working tomorrow?
I have 4 surgeries scheduled for tomorrow, which is why this is a little bit delayed for me, and I have 4 on Friday.
And what type of surgeries do you have tomorrow?
So when I heard this, I'm like, well, what are you doing here? I mean, you better have some really important, critical testimony for the Commonwealth. Why would you rearrange your schedule and give up all these surgeries? Now, some of these could be very minor. That's maybe need to insert some kind of drain tube or something like that. So I don't know how serious they are, because how could you do a normal brain surgery? I think you're like there for like 18 hours or something like that. So anyway.
Tomorrow and Friday?
I have 3 brain tumors, 1 trigeminal neuralgia, and on Friday I have 4 patients with movement disorders.
You're here today as a witness. How much of your practice, how much percent of your income is from being a consultant or a witness for a case?
Probably less than 1%. I don't do this for a living.
I want you to take us through some of your education and background. Could you share with us where you went to medical school and where you graduated from?
I went to Yale Medical School. I graduated summa cum laude.
Was that in 1981 that you graduated?
Correct.
After medical school, did you begin internships in medical residency?
I did an internship at Hennepin County Medical Center, which is a trauma center in Minneapolis. I then did 5 years of neurosurgical residency at the University of Minnesota.
And was that in Minnesota?
Correct, in Minneapolis.
Is there something about that hospital that has some specialty?
It was one of the #1 training centers for chairmen in neurosurgery at the time.
Did you, in your residency and in your fellowships, do any work or study in pathology?
During your residency as a neurosurgical resident, you do 6 months in neurology, you do 3 months of neuroradiology, you do 3 months in pathology, which includes autopsies on brains. And then you do rotations through a trauma center as a chief resident, through a VA hospital, and then ultimately at the university hospital for elective cases. We also do 6 months of pediatric neurosurgical residency.
Did you do a fellowship at New York University?
Yeah, at NYU, I did a fellowship before I went to the University of Maryland as a professor in brain transplantation. The interest was in using cells to create dopamine centers in rat brains with the concept of Parkinson's being curable with transplantation.
I'd like you to take us through some of your faculty positions, and so you can share with us some of the progression of your training and experience. And did you begin at the university?
Well, yeah, why didn't they bring somebody local there? I mean, does this guy have something specialized? He's not a pathologist. He's not a medical examiner. And so we heard from the Commonwealth's medical examiner that said somebody like him would not be qualified. Defense brought that out. Somebody like him is not qualified to talk about John O'Keefe's manner of death.
The Maryland Hospital?
Yes. In 1987, the University of Maryland recruited me to start their epilepsy surgical program, it's called BASE program. And then part of our responsibilities as assistant professors was to cover shock trauma.
Could you explain for us what shock trauma means and whether the University of Maryland Hospital was a shock trauma hospital?
So the University of Maryland and shock trauma were actually two separate entities when I started. A man named Cowley had basically developed the concept of the golden hour. So prior to Dr. Cowley, most trauma was just taken locally. That meant as a community hospital, if a patient had been in a motor vehicle accident, they needed an orthopedic surgeon, they had to call the orthopedic surgeon in, could take 15 minutes, could take 3 hours. The same thing for a vascular surgeon, the same thing for a neurosurgeon. Dr. Cowley came up with the concept that you needed a center that was strictly for trauma and every attending had to be in the hospital 24/7. So that was the concept of shock trauma back in the 80s. When I got there, we were transitioning from a very small center to a 125-bed hospital that was completely committed to trauma.
Yeah, I'm surprised because I know like one orthopedic surgeon was having to like give it up in his mid 50s just because the wear and tear on the body. So this guy, he does look older than what you'd expect a neurosurgeon to be. So yeah, that's very, very odd, I would say.
In that experience, in the years you worked there, did you have an opportunity to treat a number of people with brain injuries?
We treated well over 100 patients a month, basically, with brain injuries at shock trauma, along with spinal cord injuries.
Did you perform surgeries in different types of brain trauma and brain injuries?
Yes.
After Maryland in 1993, did you move to Miami Neuroscience Center?
Yes. In 1993, I left academics. I went into private practice in Miami, and I started the Miami Neuroscience Center. We were the first private community hospital to have what's called the Gamma Knife. So we were the 13th in the country, but the only one that was non-university based. And Gamma Knife radiosurgery is using radiation to operate on the brain.
Are you presently the director of the Miami Neuroscience Center at Larkin Hospital?
Yes, I am.
Do you conduct a number of surgeries a year there?
Correct. So I spent 19 years at Doctors Hospital, and then we moved to Larkin Hospital 13 years ago, developing the new radiosurgical unit called ZAP, and also another fancy machine called high-frequency ultrasound to treat the movement disorders.
You've noted that you have a number of professional memberships. I don't want to go through all of them. I'd like to point out a few. Are you a professional member of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons?
Yes.
Are you a member, a fellow American of the College of Surgeons?
Yes.
Are you a member of North American Skull-Base Society?
Yes,
And is that brain related?
it is.
Are you a member of the Society for Neuro-Oncology?
Yes.
Are you a member of over, or at least 34 different professional memberships?
Yes.
In your career, have you engaged in research?
Yes.
Has that research focused or centered on brain injury?
Yes, it has.
Is some of your research as a principal investigator for THAM treatment of brain tissue acidosis in severely head injured patients?
Yes.
Did that research and as a principal investigator help you in your diagnosis and treatment of brain injuries?
It actually was in the treatment of severe head injuries, patients who are unconscious, the concept of trying to relieve the increased intracranial pressure that occurs from the injury and to increase blood flow, thereby increasing oxygen to the brain.
Did you also serve as principal investigator for research for the PEG, SOD, and severe head injury?
Yes,
Could you describe that very briefly?
basically the same. One of the biggest problems in brain injury is the fact that blood flow ceases to exist as the brain swells up. And so one of the things we try to do is preserve the neurons by making sure that they have enough oxygen and blood flow to them. All these are agents that try to assist that.
I won't go through all of your research and principal investigator roles, but I want to ask you about one more. And that is, did you serve as principal investigator relative to the IRB protocol for brain pathology?
Yes.
And what did that do? What was that about?
It was about looking at what happens after a brain injury to blood vessels and tissue as the intracranial pressure increases in the brain.
Have you been part of publications of a number of different books?
Yes.
I won't list parts of all 16 books, but can I point out a few?
Sure.
Were you the author of a book chapter regarding head injury, difficult medical management?
Yes.
Were you the author of a book chapter on pediatric neurosurgical emergencies?
Yes.
Were you the author of a book chapter on complications of head injuries in adults?
Yes.
Were you an author of a book chapter, Imaging of Craniocerebral Trauma?
Yes.
Were you an author of a book chapter in emergency room assessment of the head injury patient?
Yes.
Were you the author of a book chapter, Intracranial Injuries?
Yes.
I won't list or ask you about the other book chapters that you've been the author of. Have you been involved in journal articles?
Yes.
Yeah, how convenient. Same last name as Dr. Daniel Wolf, although he has, I guess, one letter difference. The ARCA, Dr. Wolf has an E at the end of his name.
I'd like to ask you just about a few of the 70 journal articles that you have published.
Your Honor, objection.
So go ahead and ask the question without a comment first.
Were you an author of a journal article, Intracranial Pressure in Non-Traumatic Ischemia and Hypoxic Cerebral Insults?
Yes.
Were you the author of a journal article, Post-Traumatic Cerebral Infarction?
Yes.
Were you the author of the journal, Fractures of the Clivus?
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that paper?
We used thin cut CT scans to identify fractures of the skull base. Prior to CT scans, it was very difficult to actually identify radiologically a skull fracture with plain X-rays. The idea was to see if we could identify them more clearly. And so we classified them and delineated them in the paper and discussed the outcomes that were relative to those type of injuries.
In the last journal article I'll ask you about, were you the author of a journal article regarding acute traumatic midbrain hemorrhage?
Yes.
Were you the presenter in a number of presentations regarding head injury and brain injury?
Yes.
You've listed 93. I'll ask you just about a few. Were you a presenter in fractures of the clivus, clinical and radiographic features?
Yes.
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Clivus.
Thank you. Were you the presenter in acute head injury?
Yes.
And a separate presentation, fractures of the clivus, classifications and clinical features?
Yes.
Do you lecture?
Yes.
It's a good question.
Do you have peer-reviewed publications?
Yes. That was one of them.
And are you heavily involved in clinical research?
Right now, my research is more based on radiosurgical techniques and outcomes.
Over your career and your study and your clinical experience, have you treated different types of brain injuries?
Yes.
Are you familiar with a number of different types of brain injuries?
Yes, we still treat them.
Were you asked to review materials relative to this case?
Yes.
So yeah, so thanks to Andy. So it's really not brain surgery like we're thinking of. So when he's bringing out how many brain surgeries he's doing yesterday and tomorrow, it's really not the kind of thing we're thinking of, right?
Do you recall the materials?
Obviously, he's highly qualified to talk about the brain, but why would they bring a guy like that from Miami all the way up here? And I think they would have probably paid him, gosh, I think easily minimum $50,000 to review the case, fly up there, $50,000 to $100,000 easily. Because I remember shoot back when I had a case, I had to fly in a doctor. and this was like early 1990s, probably 1992 or 3, and we had to pay like $5,000 back then plus expenses. So for this guy here, I'd say nowadays it's probably like I say, at least 50.
That you reviewed?
Yes.
Could you share with us some of the materials that you reviewed?
I reviewed the chief medical examiner's assessment of the case. I reviewed pictures that I'm assuming the medical examiner took of the autopsy, and I reviewed the report from the forensic pathologist.
And before I ask you about your review of specific materials and your opinions in this case, is there a benefit to your clinical experience in studying brain injuries as opposed to the experience you had as a fellow simply with pathology?
Well, I think that for the jury to understand is a clinician understands the process from the time the injury occurs till the patient either leaves the hospital or dies. And it's a process. And as a neurosurgeon, I have a tremendous amount of experience with that, if that's what you're asking me.
Yes. And so, doctor, you reviewed a number of items of information in this case. Did you have an
Yeah, he's really drinking that water.
opportunity to review photographs of a laceration to Mr. John O'Keefe's head?
Yes, I did.
With the court's permission, I'm going to ask to display Exhibit 160.
Okay.
Dr. Wolf, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this photograph. Have you seen this photograph before?
Yes.
I want you to explain to us what you're seeing here and take us through the process of your observations.
Well, what we're seeing is an approximate 1.5 inch laceration with bridging tissue and contusions and abrasions. To us, that's just a classic blunt trauma injury. There's nothing other than just vanilla about it. This is what happens when soft tissue hits a solid ground. The skin tears apart a bit, but not through and through. As you can see, there's the bridging. You can see all the bruising or contusions and just the tear, a little bit serrated along the edges.
Thank you. If you could take that down. Dr. Wolf, as a result of that
Yeah, I've been saying it's already been game over. So
wound, did you have a chance to further look at information provided to you about the actual inside?
they haven't had a good day yet. They haven't won a single day yet of 19 days. And this 20th day, they still don't get a win.
The skull of Mr. John O'Keefe.
Yes, it was the pictures that I was reviewing showed a non-depressed skull fracture extending linearly through the clivus and into the frontal fossa of Mr. O'Keefe over the orbital roofs. He had fractures along the temporal fossa as well. So it was a classic linear basilar skull fracture.
Is basal skull fracture a
It's
characterization?
basically the base of your skull is what it encompasses. So the opening at the very bottom is what we call the foramen magnum. That connects your brainstem to your spinal cord. And then as your brainstem goes up, it goes into the different skull areas that, talk about what we call the cerebral cortexes, your occipital lobe, your temporal lobes over here, and then your frontal lobes.
So can you walk us through what happens when someone incurs this type of injury to the back of the head, how it happens, and what are the next steps for a person?
So what happens is, you fall backwards, and the linear acceleration starts to take you back down with gravity. The skull hits the ground. It gets, in layman's terms, smashed a little bit. And then the brain moves forward as a response to that. And it moves forward because you have cerebral spinal fluid and because you have the deceleration, acceleration again. As it does, your skull, if you were to look inside your skull, it's like mini mountains along your temporal bones and your frontal bones. So the brain is being thrust forward at a fairly good speed, and it's getting bruised. You can think of it as if you took a hammer to your thumb It's really turning black and blue. Those are the contusions. And so the temporal poles and the frontal poles are getting contusions because of that. At the same time, you have a space called the subarachnoid space. And I'm sure they're going to hear about the subarachnoid hemorrhage. And that space is it's very clear, thin membrane that covers all of your brain and all of your spinal cord. And normally, you really don't see it unless you open up the brain and you're operating. But when you either have a traumatic event like this, where little vessels are pulling apart underneath that membrane, or for example, the classic, when you have an aneurysm burst, the space that the aneurysm bleeds to is the subarachnoid space. The other thing that occurs in trauma like this is you can get a subdural. So the dura is the membrane that covers the whole brain and also right down your spinal canal. And it's a very thin membrane that looks like very thin leather. And in that space between the brain and the dura can be a lot of veins that go towards a central vein called the sagittal sinus. And if those tear, you have a venous hemorrhage from, which is not arterial, so it's not quick, but that can develop into a subdural as well. If you tear a portion of your brain as well, and you get a little arterial bleeds, that could create a much faster subdural hematoma. And so when you look at the pathology, the autopsy of his brain, you're looking at a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you're looking at a subdural hemorrhage, neither one of them which was huge or would have required surgery, as well as the contusions that I described in his frontal poles, in his temporal poles, and then the original bang, which was in the occipital area. These are all findings that you would see on a CT scan and an MRI scan without requiring an autopsy if he had made it to the emergency room.
I want to take a step back. At the beginning, you said that this laceration on the back of his head was caused by a fall. Could this be caused by a fall landing on hard ground?
Yes. I mean, like I said, it's a classic blunt trauma laceration.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether this injury, the laceration and the basal fracture, was caused by Mr. O'Keefe falling backwards on the ground?
My opinion is that that's what caused his whole injury.
Why did you have to lead him on that, Mr. Brendan? Why didn't you just ask him, could you give a opinion on the cause of the injury? So I think he maybe needed to lead him that way so he wouldn't forget.
The pattern of the laceration, do you have an opinion whether that is consistent with hitting the cold, hard ground?
Objection, Your Honor. Could we have sidebar on that, please?
So I'm sustaining the objection, so no sidebar.
Your Honor.
Do you have an opinion, doctor, about whether that laceration on the back of his head was caused by a particular movement?
Well, the only way he could get this kind of an injury was to fall backwards, hit the back of his head, and then the resulting, energy forces going into his brain, into his base of his skull.
Energy forces. So this is the only way you can hurt the back of your head and get a skull fracture. Really, doctor? I couldn't believe that he said that. Let's back up here real quick.
Sustaining the objection.
It's a emergency room.
Back to that
In
question
hemorrhage,
about
neither one of them,
medical
when you look at the
certainty.
pathology from, which is not arterial, so it's not quick, but that can develop into a subdural as well. If you tear a portion of your brain as well, and you get a little arterial bleeds, that could create a much faster subdural hematoma. And so when you look at the pathology, the autopsy of his brain, you're looking at a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you're looking at a subdural hemorrhage, neither one of them which was huge or would have required surgery, as well as the contusions that
See, if he's doing, based on what Andy School you're saying, if he's doing all this Medicaid procedure, he's not making much money at all doing that. So he needs to supplement it by doing stuff like this. That's why I think he's going to fly up here for $50,000. I mean, somebody his age, why would you want to get on a plane, fly all the way up there? You got to make a connecting flight, and it's just a real pain to do that. So that's why I think he's really needs to charge a lot to make it worth his while.
I described in his frontal poles, in his temporal poles, and then the original bang, which was in the occipital area. These are all findings that you would see on a CT scan and an MRI scan without requiring an autopsy if he had made it to the emergency room.
I want to take a step back. At the beginning, you said that this laceration on the back of his head was caused by a fall. Could this be caused by a fall landing on hard ground?
Yes, I mean, like I said, it's a classic blunt trauma laceration.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether this injury, the laceration and the basal fracture, was caused by Mr. O'Keefe falling backwards on the ground?
My opinion is that that's
So even think about this. Even Hank isn't saying that John O'Keefe was slammed into by a large SUV and have him fly 30 feet in the air or anything like that. There's no details, no description, just a merely falling backwards. In other words, there's no force applied to John O'Keefe to cause this kind of injury. So he just tripped and fell.
what caused his whole injury.
So how does this support the Commonwealth case? And then it's like, this is the only manner of death is falling backwards? It doesn't make any sense because there's many other things that could cause a similar type blunt force to the back of the head. So this doesn't even meet the common sense test.
The pattern of the laceration, do you have an opinion whether that is consistent with hitting the cold, hard ground?
Objection, Your Honor. Could we have sidebar on that, please?
So I'm sustaining the objection.
So the cold, hard ground, you know, how solid was the ground? It's got grass on it. And how thick was the turf? I mean, he's trying to make it sound like it's concrete or a sheet of ice or something extremely blunt and firm to land a head on. And so he also had a baseball cap. So there's other things that would have like caused the this a strike on the back of the head on grass. Plus there was some snow there as well. So all those kind of little details, obviously Hank is leaving out, right?
So no sidebar.
Your Honor.
Do you have an opinion, doctor, about whether that laceration on the back of his head was caused by a particular movement?
Well, the only way he could get this kind of an injury was to fall backwards, hit the back of his head, and then the resulting, energy forces going into his brain, into his base of his skull.
What if he fell back against, he could fall against a concrete block wall or a floor of a basement where it's concrete, even if it's carpeted or not. He could have fallen downstairs. He could have been hit with some kind of flat object.
Would that type of laceration require Mr. O'Keefe to have hit a line type or ridge type object?
A ridge type of object?
Yes.
No, I mean, like I said, the tearing of the skin in that fashion, you could look it up, would be just a classic.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I'm wondering that too, if this guy is doing the cut and run.
One trauma injury.
Is there anything about that injury that would suggest to you it had to have been something sharp or ridge-like to cause?
Objection, Your Honor. We again request kindly a sidebar on this.
All right, we'll come to
Thank you.
All right, let's back that up.
Objection.
Anything about
No, I mean, like I said, the tearing of the skin in that fashion, you could look it up, would be just a classic blunt trauma injury.
Is there anything about
Against what object? Just grass, thick turf grass that's got snow on top. It sounds like a sort of a soft landing in some respects. And the ground below, depending on how long the ground had been below zero, they don't have like in the northern United States and central part of the United States where they may have the ground is frozen for like the frost line is maybe a foot, foot and a half, or 2 feet down, and you can have it frozen like that for months at a time. I don't think the Northeast gets that kind of permanent cold ground like they do in other parts of the United States.
that injury that would suggest to you it had to have been something sharp or ridge-like to cause?
Objection, Your Honor. Begin request kindly at sidebar on this.
All right, we'll come to
Thank you.
Okay, so now Hank's trying to prove that this could be from something that's a sharp object, like maybe, or something that's more blunt, like a bat or a metal bar, crowbar, or something like that. So let's see what happens here. Let me jump ahead.
Not necessarily.
Laceration.
Judge will
So as
probably
we were
let in.
discussing, Dr. Wolf, you said this is a classic fall backwards. Is there anything about the pattern of that laceration that would suggest that there was a ridge or a line type edge that caused that wound?
Not necessarily.
And have you seen, in your experience, similar types of lacerations and breaks caused by falling on hard ground?
Yes, you can see that both in the occipital region. You can see it if patients fall on the, forehead. The skin tears, they're still bridging, and then they get bruises.
Some of your work was in Minnesota.
Correct.
Was it a colder part of Minnesota?
Very cold part of Minnesota.
you-
It's Minneapolis.
A colder part. There is no part that isn't cold in the wintertime. Brutally cold. It's right up there bordering with Canada. You get that Yukon Arctic blast that comes through there.
I'm sorry. Did you often see these type of injuries there?
Yes, I mean, we took care of a trauma center, Hennepin County. Very frequently, patients that are drunk fall down on ice sidewalks and could develop, lacerations in their head, epidurals, which are blood clots above the dura because they fracture a bone in the temporal area and they can get a bleed from a fractured artery. And it happens when people are shoveling snow and have a heart attack and fall backwards. So there are various ways that people fall, resulting in head injuries and lacerations to their forehead or to different areas of their head.
Can somebody suffer this type of injury simply by falling backwards?
Absolutely.
You had taken us through the process of falling backwards and then talked about what happens to the brain. Can I ask you a couple of detailed questions about that?
Sure.
When you explained that the brain upon impact then shifts forward and hits the front of the skull, is there a medical term for that process?
Well, the medical term is a coup contre coup injury. So the coup is when you first hit. In this case, it was the back of the head, as summarized by the laceration in the back of the head, and the contusions that the pathologist and the ME found in the back of the brain. And then the brain shifts forward, and as it's traveling at a certain velocity, because it's thrust forward on the floor of the base of the skull, it's getting bumped, and it's getting, again, you can think of it as a hammer hitting a thumb. It's getting black and blue in the areas that are sharpest.
Yeah, so like if you had a shovel, right? A shovel has a more of a flat surface and that's more blunt, and it could do the similar type of damage as what John O'Keefe has. So he's basically saying that that's the only way you could get it is from a backward fall. But even that, how's that saying anything about a car impact? You could get that from a fist fight and falling backwards, tripping on something.
Are there symptoms that result of the process coup counter coup?
It's, this is clinically, it varies. I mean, you can go from anywhere from a simple concussion where you sort of are unaware of what happened, but you're still awake, you're confused, all the way to, ultimately being in a coma.
Can this type of injury, the coup counter coup, and what you see in the review of your files, could this type of injury happen from an attack by a weapon, like a bat or a hammer?
Well, he did not have a depressed skull fracture. So any focal hit like that would more likely than not have caused a depressed skull fracture. Blood.
See, he's not an expert in causation, a pathologist or biomechanical engineer that has experience in describing and knowing from research and their own testing. This guy's never done independent testing or really studied the causation and resulting injury. So that's why this guy is really not qualified to talk about the manner of John's death.
Blunt trauma the way he had, the assumption, would cause the coup counter coup without a depressed skull fracture.
When the coup counter coup process happens with the skull fracture, does anything happen to the front of the skull?
Well, you're asking me, does the rest, I mean, the forces, depending on how hard they are, can generate fracture lines all the way to the anterior fossa. So you can have fractures along the lateral temporal area. You can have fractures along the orbital roof. The orbital roof is very thin. And so those forces can go all the way to that area.
Did you see any sign of orbital fractures in Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, he had both the ME and the pictures taken, and the neuropathologist mentioned fractures of the orbital roof.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how those fractures occurred?
From the trauma.
Could you just explain
I've
a
heard
little
that.
bit how that would happen?
Well, as he fell backwards and he struck his head, it was clearly at a very high speed generated by the gravity. The bone, depending on the quality of his bone, the density, then generated forces. There's a certain amount of lateral give, and then you get a linear force going forward. It drives all the way up the clivus and forward into the anterior fossa where his orbital roofs lay. And this is why people like this get what they call raccoon's eyes.
Do you have an opinion whether the brain itself could have caused the orbital fractures?
No, the brain is a soft substance. You could literally put your finger through the brain. We often operate on people fully awake. The brain couldn't possibly cause a fracture. The fracture was caused by the forces generated through that clivus, that middle bone in the middle of his base of the skull.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not the brain in any way could have caused these orbital fractures?
The answer is absolutely not.
In your study of the records and photographs and in your experience
That was a no-brainer. Of course, the brain isn't itself going to cause those kind of injuries to the eyes.
treating these types of injuries, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not a person would remain conscious or would be immediately unconscious after the impact of the ground?
Well, it's impossible to know whether he became immediately unconscious, but his injuries were very substantial. And it's more probable than not that at some point he quickly became unconscious and was unable to do functional activities.
What does functional activities mean?
The ability to, get himself up and about would be one of the functional activities. The ability to call for help would be a very significant cortical function. And that's why I was talking about, that there's a variation on the theme from a simple concussion to a severe concussion like this.
If a person does not have functional abilities because they are rendered unconscious, does their body, could it still move?
Yes, this is the interesting thing about our brain. So the cortex, which is the top portion of your brain, can get separated from your brainstem functionally. And what happens then is that your body is not acting autonomically, meaning vegetative. So why does that happen? We think it's because as we were cavemen, and if a caveman became unconscious, as an animal came up to eat it, the animal would touch it. Well, you have these automatic movements. One of them is called decorticating, which is where you draw your arms like this and you throw your feet out. And then a worse neurological situation is when you decerebrate. Now you push your arms out along with your legs. And that would scare off an animal. So we think that over time, genetically, this is what happened to our brains in order to create these. But those kind of movements are not thought processes. In other words, your brain is not telling you, oh, you have pain, go ahead and decorticate or decerebrate. It's an automatic movement in response to pain.
I want you to take us back now to after the fall. Would Mr. O'Keefe, in your study and opinion, have died immediately?
No.
Can you share?
I don't.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'll tell it. There is very few things that you head injury where you would die, quote, immediately. So if I took a knife and stabbed you in the back of your neck right below your skull and I drove it through your brainstem, you would probably die immediately. If I shot you below your ear and went through and through below your ear and shot through your brainstem, you would die immediately. But traumatic head injuries, you would not die immediately. It's a process. And it's a process of a combination of things. Brain swelling, which takes a while to develop. Decreased blood flow to your brain because you're getting swelling. And ultimately, death of the brainstem that controls your heart and your breathing. And so this is why there is a whole big issue about brain death. When is someone brain dead? Because it's not instant and it can take a long time to be conceived. In these injuries that are very severe that we took care of, there was a high mortality rate. In the linear skull fractures, it was about 67%. But it took time for them to die. It could take days to weeks to months. And also, these people got to shock trauma. So it was a while, whether it was hours, before they were even starting to be taken care of. And yet they weren't dead yet. That's why I don't think it was immediate.
Was there any other observations you made about Mr. O'Keefe or his body that support your opinion that he didn't die immediately?
Yeah, so you can't ask this guy about, did a vehicle hit him in the head? Was there whiplash? Where would he have gotten hit on a vehicle if he's going to get propelled 30 feet? None of these scenarios are being asked at all. So why are you even calling this guy? It makes no sense. It just shows you how desperate they are. Let me back up on this question.
Any other observations you made about Mr. O'Keefe or his body that support your opinion that he didn't die immediately?
Well, the medical examiner took pictures of his periorbital area and diagnosed raccoon's eyes. So raccoon's eyes occur because there's leakage through the orbital fractures into the periorbital space.
Yeah, that's the other point that's not brought up enough in this trial, hardly at all. I don't think the defense even raised it, even though it's on the 911 calls. Remember, we had Jen McCabe saying they flipped him over. He was face down. They flipped him over to put him on his back. So this guy's saying he landed on his back. So is Jen talking about something that happened prior to them arriving that she knows about on how John hurt his head?
Normally, it takes about 24 to 48 hours to develop. It has been noted as early as 1 to 3 hours, which would make it not immediate.
Could we please have Exhibit 14? Dr. Wolf, could you share with us what you see here in this picture?
So right here, you can see the black and blue that sort of configures if he had his eyes open, like what we describe as raccoon's eyes, right? And that's not caused by direct trauma to his eyelids. It's caused by what I described as the basilar skull fracture, which went to the anterior fossa, which is right over the orbit here, inside with leakage of blood products into that periorbital area.
You mentioned that starts or takes at least 1 to 3 hours to begin.
Minimally, yes.
You take that down, please. If Mr. O'Keefe had been brought to a trauma center or emergency room, what would the process be in your experience?
Well, he would have been intubated if he wasn't intubated in the field. One of the first things you need to do in a head injury is control the airway. Why? 2 reasons. One, you want to have enough oxygen going to the brain to feed it. And 2, you want to keep your carbon dioxide down because that causes increased intracranial pressure if it elevates. So you want to constrict the blood vessels a little bit.
I wonder if he's treated anybody with brain injuries from being attacked by a dog. I doubt it, but if they're chewing, I guess they're not, they would have to chew through the skull or something like that. That's probably not possible. But could they chew through the eyes or under their throat or something like that to get to the base of the skull?
Then he would have had a CT scan immediately in order to assess whether he has a surgical head injury.
Yeah, J shape could be something like the bottom of a magazine if somebody's getting pistol whipped. There's something unique about that signature J-shaped marking on John's skin to leave that kind of impression.
Meaning he needs to go to the operating room to evacuate something.
Also, you could have like a downward pressure if there's a downward strike, because he's making it sound like, no, it couldn't be in a blunt object. I think he's thinking of like coming at, if this is John's head with the curvature of it, and it's, let's say his face is that way and his back of his head's this way. I think he's thinking like if something comes directly at this, like a blunt force coming like this, would leave a depression in the skull. But what about something that's more of a downward strike? If there's a downward strike like this, there wouldn't be as much of a direct force to do inward pressure, and you could really knock somebody out, and then they fall down, and then so maybe it's a double strike of something. So there's any number of scenarios, and so this doctor is making it sound like there's just one way he could have had that injury, and that's from a fall, and it's just not credible.
Or not. During that process, he's obviously going to be getting medication to decrease the brain swelling. And from there, you make decisions based on his neurological function and what you're, capable of doing to, spare the brain from the rest of the injuries that will result. One of the things that occurs with contusions is a great medical term is they can blossom. which means they can get bigger. And if they get bigger, they might require surgical intervention to decrease the pressure as well as the volume of the blood that's destroying brain. And so you do serial CT scans in these patients over time, anywhere from every 6 to 12 hours to on a daily basis, depending on what the case by case, production of blossoming is occurring.
You mentioned that about 2/3 of your patients who suffer this injury pass.
Correct. What we saw is that in the patients that suffered linear clavicle fractures, 2/3 of them ultimately went on to die, and 1/3 lived.
Is there commonality on how they pass?
One of the common reasons they passed is if they trapped a major vessel in one of the fractures, they would get a significant brainstem infarct, meaning a stroke, meaning lack of blood flow to a very significant portion of their brainstem. And so that was one of the causes of.
No, that night it got down to 15, 18 degrees area, Mike. So, but we don't know what the ground temperature itself was, but it was definitely, there was maybe some level of freezing. But if it thaws during the day and it gets up to 35, 40, then the ground is sort of going to be freezing and thawing day in, day out, depending what the temperature is. And if it's below freezing for multiple days, then you start getting a thicker layer of ground freezing. But like we say, even with that, we have the snow there as a cushion, there's grass a cushion, there's a turf, there's dead grass under the green grass, if it's green or brown during the winter time. Not sure what kind of grass they have, but so you have multiple layers of a buffer cushion. So it just doesn't make any sense, in my opinion.
Of death that ultimately we understood. And then the others died from the increased intracranial pressure that drove the brainstem down through the foramen magnum.
Did you review any materials that talked about or identified Mr. O'Keefe's body temperature when he was treated?
As I recall, his core temperature was 80 when he was found.
Is that
No, that's what it was at the hospital.
significant in the process and development of his injury from the moment he fell and hit his head until his ultimate passing?
Well, hypothermia, if you define hypothermia, it starts at 95 degrees. Your core temperature is usually about 98, 98.6. 95 is very mild hypothermia. When you get to 82 degrees, you're in severe hypothermia.
Yeah, I just thought it's also the snow also acts as an insulator. And so the more it snowed that night, the more it was an insulator for the ground. Now, granted, it all depends on when he fell and hit his head, but so there wasn't that much snow initially, but snow does serve as an insulator as well for temperature. Assuming the ground is colder than the snow itself.
What happens when you're hypothermic, and I'm a neurosurgeon, but I can tell you that you get into multiple organ failure. Your heart starts to have problems. It can have arrhythmias. You're not breathing. And ultimately, at hypothermia, you also become unconscious and go into a coma-like state. Below 80 degrees, you're probably going to die. So all I can tell you, it wasn't helpful that he had a significant head injury and that he was then found hypothermic.
Is it uncommon in your experience for people that suffer this injury to pass within 5 hours?
Well, none of the patients we treated died within 5 hours, but it also didn't mean that
Yeah, has there ever been a case where somebody just falls back and they have that many different types of fractures on the brain? I mean, it depends on what you fall and land on, but and you can die from it. I get that, but so I think it all depends on what exactly you fall on, and they can't say exactly where they found him. There's no exact measurements and marking where they found John's body. Granted, that whole general area is pretty much next to near a flagpole, and there is that grass. So there's no other rocks or blunt objects in the ground there. So that's why it looks like he wouldn't have fallen there at all. And we know he definitely wasn't hit by a vehicle.
We didn't realize that they were going to be in a potentially vegetative state. You know, when someone's hypothermic, you have to warm them up in order to establish a clinical status, meaning you can't declare someone dead with a temperature of 80. You have to warm them up slowly, appropriately, and then reevaluate where they are clinically.
I've asked you questions about whether you had an opinion about Mr. O'Keefe and when he died. I want to ask it in the form of a formal opinion. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether Mr. O'Keefe died immediately or within 15 minutes?
No, I don't think he died immediately. Neither the hypothermia nor this kind of head injury would kill you immediately in any clinical experience I have.
Dr. Wolf, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Let me have a moment, Your Honor.
So what did he say to help establish this case? The evidence that Karen Reed helped to cause the death of John O'Keefe by striking John with her vehicle. We didn't hear anything about a vehicle here. So this guy was a complete waste of time, but it actually is helping the defense because it's another expert that's not talking about the vehicle and causation from a vehicle.
Thank you.
I thought the cross initially was going to be long and drawn out and go into some of these issues I'm talking about, but I think they just made the decision that this guy is actually helping us. We don't need to like go into further details because we don't know what he may say based on our questions. It may backfire on us. So sometimes you can be too aggressive in your questioning when you don't need to be. So just let your foot off the gas and let this guy use what he says to help build your case. And he's not done anything to hurt you. He's actually helping you more than anything. So here we have Alessi. Yeah, but he's still saying it's a fall. I think it could be any number of things. But anyway, either way, it still helps the defense.
May I, Your Honor?
Yes.
Morning, Doctor. I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sir, can you just describe, you started to do it a little bit on direct, a typical day for you?
I wake up at 4:15 in the morning. I go to my center. I set up patients with frames for their either radiosurgical procedures or stereotactic craniotomies. I go home. I make cappuccino for my wife at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then I get back to work at 6:30 and move on. I have patients that I'm operating on, and I have patients that I'm seeing through the day.
What type of patients and what type of work? Just in a typical day. What are you doing? What type of patients and what do you do?
It varies. I mean, I see patients with brain tumors. I see patients with hydrocephalus, which is water in their brain. I see pediatric brain tumors. I see subacute and chronic subdural hematomas, post-traumatic. I see patients with strokes that are being misdiagnosed. I see patients with cancer, metastatic disease. I used to see patients with cervical problems. I stopped doing that 2 years ago. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to tell you.
No, that's great. And is that typical day, typical of the type of days you've had for the past month, past few years? Is it generally, without specifics?
So again, we have a credibility gap with the prosecutor, Brennan, because he doesn't bring out all the injuries with this guy, right? He's only talking about the internal brain injuries, and the only thing external is he's talking about the back laceration, and then he's talking about its eyes, but he didn't talk about the laceration. So thankfully,
Is it generally?
we're going to
Correct.
get to that.
So none of your typical days, none of the past typical months have involved forensic pathology, have they? You haven't acted as a forensic pathologist in.
I am, if you could have asked that question, very straightforward. I am not a forensic pathologist. I'm a brain surgeon.
Right. And you don't perform autopsies, correct, sir? You're a brain surgeon.
Correct. In other words, I see more brains than the forensic pathologist.
Right. And is it correct to say that the brains that you see are of living people?
Correct.
Okay. So what I'd like to do.
Great one. That was
is
great.
to go to a different part of the head than was discussed, but sticking with the decedent.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last
I'm
word.
sorry, with the topic is going to be Mr. O'Keefe, the decedent in this
Okay.
matter, sir. You testified about raccoon eyes. The medical term for that, sir, is ecchymosis, right?
Correct.
And ecchymosis, raccoon eyes, does not cause a laceration to form on an eyelid, does it?
No.
Are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe had a laceration to the outside area of his right upper eyelid?
I am aware that the ME described that. Yes, sir.
Now, could, Your Honor, I'm going to, with Your Honor's permission, ask to publish what is already in evidence in a moment.
Okay.
Mr. Wolk,
What exhibit number, Mr. Alessi?
we're going to, 165, Your Honor.
Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Wolf, have you seen this photo depiction before today?
I believe I have.
Is it correct that that injury on the upper right eyelid is caused by the application of force directly to that area of the front of the head, again, namely the upper eyelid?
That's possible, yes.
Force, like getting hit in the face with a fist or a bat or something like that.
Is it more than possible? Is it probable that that injury was caused by the application of force directly to that area of the front of his head?
Well, an easy answer to that would be is that that's not part of the periorbital ecchymosis.
Thank you, sir. That was exactly going to be my next question. This injury is unrelated to any of what you've been describing, the fall backwards, the force transfer inside the skull, the, as you described it, the dura, the cerebral spinal fluid, all of that dynamic that you so ably described on your direct examination. This injury has nothing to do with that, correct?
Correct.
as
Back that
the
up.
cerebral spinal fluid, all of that dynamic that you so ably described on your direct examination, this injury has nothing to do with that, correct?
Correct.
That's interesting. Is that an old school term, brain surgeon, or it seems like more of a layperson's term? Hmm.
Thank you for answering my questions, Dr. Wolf. A pleasure again. No more questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any brief follow-up on that?
No, thank you.
All right, Dr. Wolf.
There you go. That's all. That's
Thank
all
you
they
very
needed to
much.
do. This guy actually helped them. So the laceration in the front of the face could be something like he got hit more than once. There's any number of ways that these injuries could have happened to the front. It's just not a contre-coup that caused the swollen eyes. The prosecution can't explain it. They need to explain it without having any reasonable doubt, and they just can't do it. Carlos Delfino, fractures to the back of the head and around the eyes, all caused by one impact. Sorry, yeah. And that's true. Cement floor is a lot harder than frozen ground. We don't even know that the ground is really that frozen. Like I say, there's all these other things that would soften a blow. Also, he was heavily under the influence of alcohol, and we know so much that people that are under the influence, when they get into car wrecks, and they seem to survive better than people that aren't under the influence. So you think he would have that going for him as well on the initial impact, of course. Hypothermia wise, it's not good to have that much alcohol in you. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead here. We're resuming with Christina Hanley from yesterday. On direct from Lally, continuing, she said that 6 of the 9 pieces physically matched the clear glass cupped in a jigsaw fit, and the remaining 3 pieces did not physically fit. She had a lot of references to images taken of a numbered sample, some that matched, some didn't. Lally didn't seem to score any points off this witness. It was really hard to follow, and it seems like the jurors must have been really checked out. So let's go to the cross here by Jackson. That's at 526.
Information of the sample's dyes or pigments.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gilman, you can take that down.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hanley.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you again. We met about a year ago. First things first, you were just talking about some plastic pieces in 7-18.8, correct?
It was 7-18.18.
0.18. I left a 1 out. 7-18.18. We're dealing with a lot of numbers. I'm going to see if we can cut through that here in a second.
Sure.
First of all, you indicated that you were doing a comparative analysis in different sort of different categorical ways, using microscopy, using the microspec, using the FTIR. I think you also use the FTIR in that as well.
Yes.
I'm just thinking of one thing. Notice how they did not bring up ability to have motor skills to be able to shut off a phone, call for help. Those kind of things Hank didn't ask any questions about. So I just thought that was very interesting as well.
And you indicated that your analysis concluded with those pieces could have come from the same source, from the source that in 3-1, the taillight. But you're not conclusively saying they did, correct?
It could have come from, they could have a common origin, or it could have come from another source with the same characteristics.
Right. So in other words, another way to say that, Ms. Hanley, is it may have come from the taillight, may not have.
It's a possibility.
Okay. I also want to ask you real quick about the taillight manufacturer. You were shown an exhibit, I think it's exhibit 200, and I think we have that available. With the court's permission, we don't have to cut the lights. I think the lighting is just fine. This is exhibit, or a photograph of exhibit 200 that you saw just a second ago. Quick question about that. In your inspection of that taillight, it's true, is it not, that is manufactured entirely of plastic or plasticine pieces? There is no glass in that taillight, correct?
I have to check my notes. I don't think I noted any glass.
Okay. So in other words, you didn't note any glass inherent in the manufacture of that taillight. It's basically plastic.
Yeah, I think most of the parts were plastic. I'm not 100% sure if the entire thing was plastic. There may have been other material, but portions were plastic.
But you certainly didn't see any glass inherent in the manufacture process.
I'd have to double check my notes, but I don't think I did.
Okay.
Do you want her to check her notes?
Why don't you? Are your notes in front of you?
Yes.
With the court's permission.
Sure.
Okay, so I did not make any notation that I noted portions that were glass.
Great. Final point before we get into the actual analysis. On any of the glass, I want to shift gears to just the glass material that you analyzed and that you looked at and you inspected. You saw no blood, no skin, no biological material, no tissue, human tissue or otherwise, on any of those pieces that you inspected, did you?
Upon examination of those items, making observations of those types of material, that's not my area of expertise. I don't think I noted anything that was maybe consistent with that.
So in other words, even though you're not in the bio material expert section of the lab, you certainly would have noted if there was skin or biological material or obvious blood on glass pieces. You're looking at them in many cases through a stereo microscope, correct?
Yes, I would have made note of observations of anything that I would have noted on the surface.
Great, and you did not, because you didn't see anything that you suggested that, right?
I think I just made note, I have to check each item, but I think I did note that there was some dirt debris on some of the items.
But not biological material.
Yeah, I think that's key. Thinking back to the injuries of John, why would one eye swell up and not the other? If you have a blow to the back of the head, it's almost like square in the back of the head. Why would you have one that's normal and the other one that isn't? Because you should have bilateral swelling, hemorrhaging of your eyes if you have that contra, and that was not brought up. The doctor didn't ask it. Nobody else brought that up, Hank or or a lessee. But if you stop to think about it, because I had a case where a client was accused of shaken baby of like a 3-month-old son, and there was bilateral retinal hemorrhaging at that time, and so there was similar kind of thing, blunt force trauma, some fractures and whatnot. So if you have blunt force, it's going to spread across your whole brain, and you're going to have equal swelling of the eye. So I think the delayed onset of the non-swelling, not the eye that didn't swell as fast, is because there was a punch in the one eye that swelled it in almost instantly, and the other one had a delayed onset. So that also further supports the hit in the face theory the defense could pursue.
I did not note anything that would be maybe consistent with that.
Great, thank you. I want to talk about the comparisons that you did. And you'll forgive me, I'm a visual learner. So I'd like to talk about it in 4 categories.
Okay.
Linear categories. Category 1, item 3-2. Category 2, item 3-3. Category 3, item 7-12. Category 4, item 7-14. 3, 2, 3, 3, 7, 12, 7, 14. Can we talk about it in those particulars?
Sure.
Okay. 3-2 was the cup, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm going to use the word cup rather than glass for obvious reasons. You can get confused by that. So when I say the cup, do you know what I'm talking about?
Item 3-2.
Great. 3-3 are the 5 items that were found on the bumper, claimed to have been found on the bumper by MSP or crime. Okay?
Yes.
5 items, A, B, C, D, and E, correct?
Correct.
Item 7-12 are 9 items, glass items, that were recovered at 34 Fairview by Trooper Buchanan in an evidence envelope, correct?
So sustained as to who they were recovered from.
Sure. Did you receive the items along with an evidence envelope?
I need to double check if it was an envelope, but I received it packaged.
Okay. And the packaging normally, under normal circumstances, the packaging comes with labels. It gives you reference about where things came from. For instance, when Mr. Lally asked you, were you aware or did you become aware that items were claimed to have been found on the bumper? You didn't actually find those items.
All right, Wancha, you're saying raccoon eyes are a direct result of basal skull fracture. There's no scientific basis for which eyes swell and discolors first. Gravity may be a factor. Well, but if it's a square hit in the back of the head, both eyes would swell up equally is what I'm saying. The fact that there was such a delayed onset that the one didn't swell up until after John got to the hospital, and there's that one that was right away super swollen there at the scene at 34 Fairview, that to me supports the notion that it was a blow to the face.
But that was the description you were getting, correct?
That was the description of the item in our limb system.
Okay. And going back to 7-12, that's our 3rd category. Was that described as 9 pieces of glass that were found at 34 Fairview by a sergeant by the name of Buchanan? Or do you recall that?
I am not sure who recovered them.
Well, what it said on the evidence envelope, that's what I'm asking.
I would have to check my photos to see if it says that.
We'll get to that in just a second. But fair enough. 7-12, 9 items, A, B, C, D, E. And if my memory serves, I, K, and L.
I'd have to refer to my notes to.
Can you please?
Yes. So the 9 pieces of glass from 7-12 were labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, I, K, and L.
Great. And then finally, what was in 714. That's an easy one. One piece of glass.
That's correct.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Let me jump ahead here.
If I could, Ms. Hanley, I'm going to hand you photographs. That should be two photographs of the exact same thing. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
I agree.
I've never seen. I did not take this photo.
Understood.
So I'm not. I haven't seen them, so I don't know.
So I'm asking you to look. I know you haven't seen
Yeah.
that photo. Does it look like the cup?
It looks consistent with the cup.
Okay. Just gonna set this aside for a second. Take a look at the second photo. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photo?
If you're just trying to do your job and you're nervous about it and you got to deal with Hank. So she's just doing her job here. I don't think there's anything she's a part of that's part of all the corruption going on.
So I did not take this photo. It appears to be a photo of a container that another analyst took a photo of item 7-12.
And item 7-12 once again included plastic pieces and 9 glass pieces, correct?
Correct.
Do you see the evidence label on the very top of that evidence envelope?
I'm not sure which label you're talking
The
about.
one
Oh,
under the red tape.
yes.
Does that appear to be a label marker that's done to maintain chain of custody?
So I think that label. Sorry.
She's so afraid to say something that might help defense.
Sure.
But trying to be honest, I think. All right, let's jump ahead. I think she has pressure from the prosecution more than anything. Not to mention, this is widely covered. They look like a sad bunch over there. Trying to forward it here.
Can you just look at that? What I'm most interested in is, do you see a name, a trooper's name in the middle of that evidence bag?
Yes, I do.
Is that Buchanan?
It looks like it says that, yeah.
Okay, and just so we're clear, that bag is associated with 7-12 of your analysis. The item 7-12, correct?
Yes, again, I didn't take this photo, but I have,
I
yeah.
realize that. It says 7-12
Yeah.
right on the photo, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's all I need. Taking a look at what's been marked as triple I.
I'm telling you, the one eye swelling way before the other and becoming like a goose egg or whatever it was. I think that really supports the notion as also with the same side as the laceration near that eye. I think that really supports the strike in the front of the face that caused the backward fall, if there was a fall.
For identification, do you see a name associated with that evidence bag?
Yes.
What name is that?
It's actually a little hard to read. It looks like it says it could say Trooper Proctor.
Okay, and that is associated with 7-14, our fourth category, correct?
So here he's just trying to tie everything to either Trooper Proctor or else Sergeant Buchanan.
It is labeled as, excuse me, 7-14.
Thank you. And finally, does that, which has been marked as, for identification at least, as triple J, does that appear to be the contents of that bag, which is a single piece of glass in 7-14?
This appears to be the photo that the analyst prior to me took of item 7-14.
And that would be analyst Valier.
Correct.
You see her initials there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the four categories, just so we're clear and we can stop using so many numbers because they can get confusing. 3-2 is the cup, right?
Yes,
3-3 is the bumper glass, correct?
that is correct.
7-12 is the Buchanan glass, correct? You just looked at it,
Yes,
okay? 7-14 is Proctor glass, the single piece, correct?
correct.
So when I make reference to those items by those names, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
hesitant.
No, I just, I'm just used to referring to them to the item numbers, but I will try to stay with you.
My brain will melt if we continue that way.
Can she do it both, Mr. Jackson?
Sure. Any way that you wish. I have another document that I would like to approach with, if I could, with the court's permission.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like you to take a look at that. You've got a copy of this. Have you ever seen that before, or a variation of it?
Yes.
Okay, saw it last year, correct, or something close to it last year?
Yeah, it looks consistent.
Okay,
Okay. If there are any others, Mr. Jackson, why don't we bring all the,
this is it.
Okay, let's move ahead here. Yeah, they do look pretty sad over there, don't they? They look miserable. The only person we recognize there is John O'Keefe's mom there with her hand covering her side of her face there, shaking her head again. Look at her doing all that head shaking. That should not be condoned. That's not honorable. You need to allow Karen Reed to get a fair trial. So I wish somebody would shut that down. Of course, you're not the judge. She's probably not going to say anything about it, even if you tell her about it. All right, so you're saying it's old school to make them sound more important than they are. So you're talking about the brain, saying he's a brain surgeon versus a neurosurgeon. Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. I guess you're a lawyer and a nurse.
copy that I was using? I need a copy.
If I may approach?
Yes. Thank you. All right, so let's mark this first for identification.
Happy to.
I got tongue tied there.
KKK for ID.
Ms. Hanley, if I could ask you very briefly, I want to go through this.
Well, I think it most likely is the initial hit is coming from the front, not the back, and that's landing on your head, on your back and your head after getting attacked in the face. That seems to make the most sense.
Talk with you for a moment. Do you recognize something on the left? Look at the first category. Do you see 3-2?
Yes,
How is that described?
it's described as a cup.
Okay, and you see that there's a photographic representation of the cup just above it, correct?
It looks consistent with,
Okay. Moving to the second category. What category is that?
it's item 3-3.
And 3-3, first of all, there's a photograph above it. Do you see that?
Yes,
It appears to be of a bumper, correct?
yes,
You didn't take that picture.
I did not.
Okay, let's look down beneath it. You indicated that there were 5 items in 3-3, A, B, C, D, and E, correct?
Correct.
Do you see A, B, C, D, and E represented in that category on this chart?
I do see A, B, C, D, E categorized, yes.
Great. Under A, you previously testified that the bumper glass sub A in 3-3 did not match the cup, correct?
That's correct.
Did not match anything in 7-12?
Sorry, just give me one moment. That's correct.
And did not match anything in 7-14?
That's correct.
And you see those represented by sort of the international symbol for negative, correct? A circle with a line through it. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Under subcategory B, glass B or item 3-3B, did not match the cup, did not match 7-12, did not match 7-14.
That's correct.
Is that accurately represented?
The jury's sort of like, what do you guys are having your own conversation up there? Can you show something on the screen what you're talking about? Or this is sort of like you get bogged down like this. I don't like seeing this in a trial in front of jury members.
Represented on the chart.
Yes.
Finally, with regard to E as an echo in that same item, 3-3, you see that there is a green indication that glass recovered by Proctor does match or did match in your analysis or was consistent with the item in 7-14, correct?
It was consistent microscopically and instrumentally.
Does that accurately reflect that finding on this chart?
Yes.
Okay, now turning to category 3. There were 9 pieces of glass that you looked at, correct?
Correct.
A through F, I, K, and L. Is that right?
If I could just reference my report to make sure.
Of course.
Yes, those are the correct letters.
And A, B, C, D, F, and K all matched the cup, correct?
Again, I would just need to confirm with my report.
Take your time.
She at least is very conscientious about her duties. She's not wanting to just be flippant and glib like so many of these Commonwealth witnesses we've seen.
Yes, so A, B, C, D, F, and K
All matched the cup.
had a physical match to 3-2, the cup.
Is that accurately represented on this chart? With green.
Yes.
And E is in Echo, I is in India, and I think that's L is in Lima, did not match the cup, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, is that accurately represented on this chart?
Yes.
And finally, the last category, 7-14, that is the single piece of glass that was recovered by Trooper Proctor. That did not match the cup, and it did not match anything in 7-12, correct? Any if you need to check your notes, feel free.
I'm going to jump ahead here.
That the court indicated at sidebar.
Let's go to where.
All right, then come on over.
I want to go to where the chart was.
See the chalk that's been, or actually what's been marked as Exhibit 205 in evidence on the screen?
Yes,
Is that consistent with what you and I were just talking about at the witness stand?
yes.
If you'll direct your attention to the screen on the right, just because it's a little easier and I think the laser pointer shows up a little better. You see the 4 categories represented in this exhibit?
Yes.
Okay, so 3-2, I'm going to go over it very quickly one more time, just visually. 3-2 on the left is the cup, correct?
Yes.
3-3 represents the 5 pieces of glass of what we call the bumper glass, A, B, C, D, and E, correct?
Yes.
7-12 is the 9 pieces of glass recovered by Trooper Buchanan at 34 Fairview, correct?
Yes.
And finally, 7-14 is the single piece of glass recovered by Trooper Proctor, correct?
Yes.
Taking these one by one, just so everybody see. Taking these one by one, looking at starting with the bumper glass, category 2. Piece A did not match the cup, anything in 7-12 or anything in 7-14, correct?
That's correct.
Piece B did not match the cup, did not match anything in 7-12, did not match anything in 7-14, correct?
That's correct.
And moving over to category 3, there were some matches in these 9 items, 6 of them, A, B, C, D, F, and K, correct?
Yes.
But what those matched, Ms. Hanley, with a cup, nothing on the bumper, correct?
Correct.
And what didn't match the cup were E, I, and L. Is that right?
That's correct.
Moving back to category 2, however, there was one thing, item E, that did match something in this series of categories. Isn't that right?
Not a physical match, but instrumentally there was consistency.
All right. And this is an item, the only piece of bumper glass, the only piece of bumper glass to match anything else in your analysis. Matched what? What was consistent with what?
Item 3-3, piece E, was consistent in physical and instrumental properties with the sample that I took from item 7-14.
Which is the single piece of glass recovered by Michael Proctor, correct?
Yes.
But not a single piece of glass, nothing that you analyzed coming from that bumper matched the cup. Did it? Nothing.
Physical match comparison, there was no physical match comparison to the cup.
Are we done with this, Mr. Jackson?
We can take this down, Your Honor. Your Honor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Wiley?
All right, Lally's on only for a few minutes here. About 4 minutes.
Now, Ms. Hanley, as far as you were asked some questions on cross-examination about biological pieces or tissue or things being on the glass, and you referenced that that was done in another unit, correct?
Yes, if if that type of examination was needed, that would be done in a different unit.
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to allow that, but next question.
Which unit would that be conducted in?
Objection.
So the objection sustained. You need more, Mr. Lally, before you move on.
Now, as far as the chalk that you were just presented, as far as the 4 photographs that were depicted in there, have you ever seen any of those 4 photographs before?
No.
Do you know specifically who or where any of the items 3-2, 3-3, 7-12, or 7-4 were physically recovered from?
I just have the description that's put in the limb system when it's submitted to the lab.
And do you know that 3-2, the drinking glass, was recovered by the Canton Police Department on January 29th, 2022?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you know that item 3-3, the bumper glass, was recovered by Ms. Noreen Hartnett from your lab on February 1st, 2022?
Sustained.
Do you know that each of the 4 items were recovered by different people on different
Objection, Your
dates
Honor.
at different
May
locations?
we approach?
Yes.
Yeah, good. You need to be aggressive. You need to fight back. All right, let's forward this. Pretty much when you have Lally doing the direct, there's nothing significant the witness has to say from the Commonwealth's perspective. So the heavyweight witnesses that Hank thinks are heavyweights, he's going to take them himself, obviously.
Ms. Hanley, from your conclusions that you testified about before, you found that the item 3-2, the drinking glass, was consistent with 6 different pieces from item 7-12 that were found in the roadway outside of 34 Fairview Road, correct?
That's correct.
And you also found that piece E from item 3-3, the bumper glass, was consistent with the single piece from item 7-14 that was found in the roadway outside of 34 Fairview Road. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also found that items from 7-18.18, the debris from Mr. O'Keefe's clothing, were consistent with the item 3-1, the taillight housing, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained is to form.
Now, as far as the chalk that you were presented with on cross-examination, was there anything in there about item 7-18.18 or item 3-1, either the taillight housing or the debris from Mr. O'Keefe's clothing?
No, there was not.
Nothing further.
Anything?
Very briefly. So in sum, not a single piece of glass on that bumper could be connected to that cup, correct?
There was no physical match to the pieces that I compared for physical match from the bumper. There was no physical match to the glass cup 3-2.
Thank you. So another way of saying that is not a single piece of glass that you analyzed on that bumper matched that cup, correct?
Sustained.
But the one piece of glass that did match something came from the same source, was consistent with coming from the same source as the single piece of glass recovered on the possession of or bagged by Trooper Michael Proctor, correct?
It was consistent with item 7-14.
That's all.
All right, Ms. Hanley, you are all set. I'm going to see counsel for a minute. Jurors, feel free to stand up and stretch.
All right. So what they wind up doing is the judge calls a recess. They're not going to convene back until next Tuesday. So this is a huge break in the case. Granted, we have a federal holiday, Memorial Day weekend here in the United States on Monday. And a lot of people, especially government workers, they get Friday off as well. And so what we have is a lot of vacation days starting this have already started this week, and then they also have next week off. So I guess in some ways they could have a 4-day weekend also for the jury, but to also have tomorrow off. Tomorrow, not having any witnesses available for the Commonwealth, I wonder if they are having problems getting the other aperture witness there, Welcher. I think Welcher probably is thinking he needs to go forward and cooperate. Otherwise, him backing out of the biggest case he's ever testified in, at least in terms of media exposure, I can't imagine that he's having a fun decision on that either way. But I mean, for the sake of saving face for your company to the public, I can see why he would say, you know what, we're just not going to cooperate. This is too embarrassing. This Burgess guy and his resume fiasco, his CV fiasco, we just can't take any more lashings in the public eye. And so I just, yeah, there's a big question on whether he'd be wanting to cooperate and testify. So, Almost Shark, you're saying Hank mentioned he'd have aperture after the holiday. So let's see if there's any.
All right, so jurors, I know you don't like it when we're at sidebar. We don't
Hold on a
like it
second.
when we're at sidebar, but I can tell you that after speaking to the lawyers now, we're ahead of schedule. And they've worked very hard to get us to this point where we're ahead of schedule so that tomorrow, instead of being a half a day, you have tomorrow off. So you have tomorrow and Friday, a good long weekend. It's very, very important. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't say a word about this case. Don't let anybody say anything to you about this case. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. I believe next week, except for Thursday, are full days every day. Watch your social media use this weekend as well. Have a great long weekend. We'll see you here Tuesday morning, ready to go.
Court, all rise to the jury.
All right. So I'm gonna do some more Q&A here then. Let me first look at something here. I'm looking at the actual defense motion. Let me go ahead and pull it up, see if there's to exclude the testimony of Dr. Isaac Wolf. This one here, I guess I can't scroll. Yeah, I can. Okay. You know, this is what, then I can't, if I'm full screen, I can't move it. So if you notice this motion here, they're basically saying that Commonwealth's witness, Dr. Isaac Wolf, cannot testify as to being an expert in the cause and manner of death of John O'Keefe. And they requested a Daubert hearing to challenge his credentials. So I don't think he would have survived a Daubert hearing on the cause of death, because it's like they're saying here, how does he have a reliable basis in the knowledge and experience in his discipline to render opinion in the field of determining manner and cause of death? Now, manner of death is one thing, but by looking at the autopsy report and having that experience on the brain, he did do some kind of wound type surgeries many years ago, like in the 90s and before, but So here we had, I guess I'm not going to go in it. There's a lot of in the conclusion here, you can see though, they're saying Dr. Wolf is not a pathologist or forensic pathologist, and his proper testimony and methodology is outside the scope of his expertise, thus failing both prongs of the Daubert-Lanigan standard. And so they asked the court to exclude him as a witness. Otherwise, they're asking for a hearing on that. So what we had then for the judge's opinion was, let's go look at that real quickly here. And then I'm going to take some questions. All right, so let's look again. Here's Judge Cannoni's ruling, just like always a typical ruling of hers, letting any expert for the Commonwealth to come in and denying defense the same in many respects. So just she's going over his qualifications like he testified at court. It's very old literature that he wrote on many years ago. So anyway, it's just that they would rely on somebody this far beyond having relevant experience, current experience, is really shocking. And like some of y'all were saying here tonight, his experience level, the experience level of neurosurgeons in the Boston area and then for the Northeast in particular, I mean, you can find some really highly qualified experts. So for Hank to pull somebody out of Miami there, really a strange maneuver. And I can't help but wonder, is a jury wondering the same thing? Why would you get a guy out of Miami? Why didn't you call it any of the doctors that treated John O'Keefe? It's just really bizarre. Yeah, they probably had to search a lot of states. Pierce, like Frida, is asked, have I ever had an expert bow out testifying for me, whether prosecution or defense? No, I just had the doctor I mentioned earlier tonight. It was actually a court-martial case in Texas, and he was originally a MD, active duty ER colonel. And then when he left the military, he was in private practice. I think it was in El Paso, and he refused to come testify unless he was paid to leave his private practice business. And so that's why he was requiring the $5,000 fee. And so he wasn't going to come unless he was paid that money. So we really didn't have a choice but to call him because it was an attempted murder case. But I mean, when you have a guy like Burgess coming before you as a vice president of this aperture, talk about wanting to hide under a rock. I can't believe this guy would come forward and testify. You just sort of, would you do that for Hank Brennan, seeing the way that Hank Brennan conducts himself in a court of law? And I guess he hasn't seen that, but maybe he's going to go back and look and see the way the medical examiner, which treated on redirect by Hank, decide to throw in the towel. Little Miss Red Velvet is asking how long until I think the Commonwealth's arrests and the defense starts its evidence. I think we maybe have a day or two still from the Commonwealth, and they're going to rest their case. And then defense, we heard from Karen Reed after the court session ended that they're going to be much more aggressive and thorough this year than last year. So I think it's going to be. I think they could shorten their defense somewhat though, because they're winning so much. They really have outperformed the prosecution every step of the way. So we got 20 days, and we got 20 days of testimony, and they have not won a single day of testimony. I mean, that's a huge loss. This thing should not have been a case that go into trial. That this indictment should not have happened. One of the things, for example, in Texas we have here is we have the ability to present evidence, or at least to offer evidence to a grand jury. So I've done that before. When I get a case before it goes to a grand jury, I can actually find out when the grand jury is set if I have a client that's arrested, and then I can present evidence in terms of a packet. I also have had witnesses outside the grand jury room to be available to be sworn and testify to try to prevent my clients from being indicted. And it's worked well because there's a lot of ash and trash that this gets propped up on a felony indictment. And if you don't have a state where you can allow defense to present evidence, or at least offer it up. So in other words, here in Texas, I cannot go in the courtroom and they're going to have a prosecutor. They don't allow defense attorneys in there at all. There's no matter of right to have a witness subpoenaed to that room. But if I submit a memo, I write up a letter and describe what I have outside the courtroom for witnesses, a quick summary of what they would say, and I make a little argument of why my client should not be indicted. And the times I've done that, I've not had my client indicted, and they have not called any of the witnesses I had outside the courtroom either. So, or the grand jury deliberation room. So anyway, if you could have that opportunity in Massachusetts, which I'm sure they don't, then, this case wouldn't have gone to, I don't think a grand jury would have indicted Karen at all, but they can cherry pick the evidence. And so pretty much anybody can get indicted on a felony in most states, most all states. Wise gal, I've not heard about the Walsh case that I recall, so I'll have to look into that. Really, we got the same cops. Is that one being covered here on any of the national channels like Court TV or Law and Crime? Actually, yeah, I think it's a lot of money they would have to pay him. He's not gonna. A guy's that senior as a doctor. It's gonna be big bucks. And what did he add to help the Commonwealth? Nothing. It just caused more help for the defense. Mary Shea, who I think will call the brain expert Stonebridge Commonwealth of Defense. Why would Hank call this Dr. Wolf and then call her as well? It makes no sense. I think of course, he's not doing anything that makes any sense. So defense will call Stonebridge, I would believe is accurate. And I'm thinking Hank won't call Stonebridge. I think he realizes he's done too much damage with the medical examiner. And to call this guy and then Stonebridge, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and he doesn't want the truth coming out. So I just don't see Stonebridge being called by him, but anything's possible because he's also looking like he's hiding the ball if he doesn't. So that's, I think, the only reason he called the medical examiner. Jennifer Rank, the guys with the fake credentials ended the prosecution's case. The jury just can't trust Brennan. Yeah, I mean, he's not been called out on the carpet either for him representing to court that he just found out on May 11th about this report, this updated report from Burgess, when he actually talked to him about it on the 7th, when the deadline and the suspense was met by ARCA experts. So I'm sure the first thing he did is called up Burgess after seeing the report and said, "Hey, we got to counter this." I think the jury gets that. Queen of the Trolls, you're saying they still haven't, 30 days still haven't told the jury how he died? Yeah, we still don't have anyone saying this is a homicide as a medical examiner. Harvey Dilworth. This case so bizarre, you start questioning my own sanity. Yeah. No, I don't want to I don't want to act like doing court because, first of all, it's not acting. It's got to be real. It's got to be from the heart. That's why when I see guys that don't have conviction and heart and they're up there just going through the motions and you got justice on the line, if you don't have in your gut a real zest and zeal for making sure justice happens, and not a conviction, but justice happens, then you shouldn't be in the criminal law field as a prosecutor. And a lot of defense attorneys also I've seen don't really care about the outcome of the case so much. They're not going to go in there and give it their best effort. And some attorneys just flat out will not go to trial if they're defense counsel. They just don't like going to trial. You have to have a strong fortitude. You have to know the rules of evidence. You have to really work your case well. You have to know the law better than your opponent. You have to know the facts better than your opponent. And you got to go in there and be able to fight prosecutors that, in case they do act like Brennan, you got to be able to have the guts to stand up to him and go toe to toe. And also the judge, if the judge is railroading you, you got to stand up to that as well. So a lot of people just don't want to deal with all that. There's a lot of emotional build up to that. You got to be tenacious. And so there's a lot of attorneys that just don't want to do that. But in any event, it's not about acting. It's like I say, it's you gotta live it and breathe it. The injustice, if it's not genuine, the jury, I think, can see right through you on that. And I think the jury sees that this defense really believes in their client. Yeah, full melt. Dr. Wolf helped the defense tremendously despite trying hard to follow this Commonwealth narrative. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, Ashley, you're saying you knew a recent case in Texas where a person's lawyer presented a packet to the grand jury before the indictment hearing was happening, and they got all the charges dismissed. I think most attorneys don't even do that. Well, if a client comes to me after they're indicted, then obviously it's too late to do anything at that point. Tad, you're saying a lot of lawyers have different relationships with one another outside of the courtroom. What about here? No, I don't. I don't think there's any kind of conversation they're having outside the courtroom. They don't want. They won't look at each other. I mean, the only local guy there is Yannetti, and he's from Boston, so he will get down there once in a while, probably to Norfolk County, not on a weekly basis, probably even, but he's got to deal with these guys. It would not be fun. Okay, Walsh, that's the defendant. Is that the Birchmore case? Can you guys clarify that for me? Casey, y'all asking, have I been following jury reactions to witness testimony at all, and what's my take on how they're reacting? All I'm hearing is that from the different people reporting it, that they're taking good notes, except for one person, and they're making they're having reactions to like really incredible, bizarre moments of testimony when there's outright lying going on, and so I think that's a good sign. I would really have to see it to know firsthand. This is really unlike any jury I've dealt with before because they're all so young. I've not seen that before in any juries I've worked on. But both in the we would never have a young jury like that in the military, and also in this many civilian trials I've done. The criminal trials, there's not a young jury like that. It's usually upper middle aged and some elderly. You don't really see that many young folks. Thank you. Pamela Jean, you're asking, do I think judge will rush the defense to hurry up? I can see that happening. Do I think Brennan realizes he's on sinking sand? I mean, I don't know how you can think. I think he knows he's got a weak case. And I guess I've said this consistently. I think he knows he got a weak case because he's trying to hide the truth. No prosecutor would be willing to do this outlandish job that he's done to prevent the truth from coming out. All these objections, and he knows that judges keeping out massive amounts of evidence that it's exculpatory type evidence in favor of Karen. So he would only do that because he knows he's got a weak case. So if you're trying to hide the ball and actively, intentionally hiding the ball over and over again with so many witnesses, you know you're gonna probably lose a case. So I think he has to realize that. He's probably not trying to dwell on that. He's just trying to think every day how he can keep out more of the truth. That's probably his main focus. Lisa Lee, how's it okay for the judge to use sneaking the prosecution signals? I mean, I don't know if the defense is calling them out, that kind of conduct out on sidebars or not. If they did in front of the jury or when the jury's not there and that we, the public, heard it, I think there'd probably be such a tongue lashing. But I would do it not at a sidebar, but I would do that without the jury there, but make sure it's on the record. They got to put it on the record. Lieutenant Pez, I hope the defense insists that jurors pick the foreman. If the judge picks it, we know that that person has some kind of deal with Hank Brennan, like the foreman last year who promised Lally a jury. Well, that's what was said. I don't know how credible that information is that Lally knew the foreperson of the jury, a former cop, but since he's been around 20 years, I guess as a prosecutor, he probably maybe does know that foreman. But we don't know the absolute ground truth of that. But yeah, if the defense can somehow prevent the judge from picking the foreperson, that'd go a long ways. Hannah Bell, do I think the O'Keefe side still think Karen's guilty, or do you think they're finally getting it? No, I think those dirty faces and comments under her breath that Peggy O'Keefe's given towards Karen Reed and her defense team, I think that's a sign that she absolutely will not see this for what it is. She's always going to hate Karen and think she did it no matter what the outcome is. Teresa M., we still have the manner of death. That's true. Hope you're doing well. I think you're the one that has some hardship you're going through, so I hope you're doing well. Oh my God. I never heard of that. Julie Nelson. Frontline did a show years ago. First time cameras and jury deliberations, and one said he'd go along with the rest and needed a nap and slept on a sofa. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine that? Wow. You give that low regard for doing justice to somebody. See, somebody like that, I would try to screen out. And they seem like they didn't have a sense of justice. I'd try to pick the right questions to try to screen them out. Pamela Jean, how can a judge be this biased in front of the world? She truly believes she's untouchable, sickening. Yeah, it is really, really upsetting and disturbing to see what's going on there. But she just thinks she can get away with it. Carlos Gonzalez, criteria for disqualifying a judge during trial. Well, the judge has to recuse themselves. There's not really a process for getting a judge removed through a higher level appellate judge. I think they could always do a writ, but there in Massachusetts, there's just so many rights that are deprived. Fierce like Frida. Yeah, I've heard that Aperture removed the website for Shannon Burgess, removed his CV and LinkedIn. Yeah, they had removed the LinkedIn earlier, and then now they removed his CV. Yeah, Ashley, you're saying the things the judge is ignoring and allowing Brennan to get away with so egregious and just blatant disrespect for all his defense attorneys. It is just so manning. Simone Miller, you're saying, I didn't care for the doctor on stand today. He had too much of a God complex. But the kind of responsibility these guys have on them when they're opening up somebody's brain, or even if they're sticking some probe in the brain where you could kill somebody in a matter of seconds, they have to be very extremely confident people. So, I mean, if you don't have a doctor that's operating on your brain that's super confident in what they're doing, then that's not a good thing. Yeah, Michelle. I mean, look at the Kohlberger case as well. That one is just so disturbing. I was only following it until they had him arrested, and after that, I didn't follow it because it was just that gruesomeness of that crime was just so sickening. Ryan B, do you think the defense can bring an 8th grade science teacher to demonstrate why the surface area from a large SUV colliding with a human body could never lead to a broken taillight? No, the defense is going to be held to a higher standard. And the defense wouldn't want to have somebody at that level anyway, obviously. But so I think you may be joking about that. But yeah, really, this sort of is common sense. Yeah, Lubin Dubin. Without crash reconstructions, they have no way to explain anything. I would have to assume that this was related to re-prep Welcher for damage control version, or maybe he's having second thoughts of cooperating. Maybe they need time to try to incentivize him or offer more money or something. I just can't believe he would be willing to still come forward and testify. Okay, thanks, KCL. Brian Walsh. I'll have to check that out. Is it going to be televised though? I guess I'll find that out. Kara Feeble, do you think this case for the history books, law books? Yeah, I see a lot of questions where people talk about, hey, do you think they'll study this case in law school? I don't know what law school is like now. I went to law school in 1987 to 1990. So we didn't look at any cases. We had video back then, but they didn't have trials filmed at all. So to study stuff. So I don't know if they would even do that nowadays because who has the time to study this case in law school? They're trying to more get you up to speed right away. They'll throw you smaller fact scenarios. I don't think they're going through and doing an autopsy on a real case. But yeah, this would be really eye-opening because you could walk on through and say, look what they did wrong here. This is not how you should be acting. Brennan is a good example for how not to act. Fierce, you're saying, do I think that HB attitude will come out and the jury will be negatively impacted? I think they've already tuned him out. I don't think they trust him. Marine Gardner. I don't know if they don't trust the police or not, but after seeing what happened today, if they did, or through this trial, they should certainly realize that you cannot trust law enforcement in mass. You got to look at them as individuals. Pretty much like any kind of profession, you can have folks that are just absolutely atrocious. Doesn't matter what they are. You can have really bad neurosurgeons, really bad lawyers, really bad judges. GMS, you're saying a small town, you can never underestimate this crowd. But what we're hearing is that everybody around the local area there thinks that Karen's getting railroaded. It's probably like a 95% of the local community thinks she's getting railroaded. So that's why I think they'll never have a hung anything worse than a hung jury. But Anne Marie, what's it called when you file a petition against a judge? What are you talking about? Citizens? Like any citizen can file a complaint. Any citizen in the world can file a complaint against judges, especially one if there's a coverage on TV. You just have to Google that. I've already talked about that as well a couple weeks ago. All right, I'm going to go for one last question and I'm going to sign off. Nathan, you're asking, is Karen Reed going to get an appeal bond after the verdict? In other words, is she going to start serving her sentence right away, or is she going to be able to post bond or have the bond revert to post trial after she's sentenced? So, yeah, I do not know the answer to that. So, some places, as soon as you find out you're convicted, you get hauled off to the jail and you're waiting your sentencing, and then after sentencing, then you go to prison. So, in some places, you can still be out on bond. So, I would say, knowing the way things are in Massachusetts, you probably go straight to confinement, and you don't have a chance to bond out. But I don't know, and I haven't heard anybody else talking about that. I know that questions come up before. So anyway, all right. With that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks for your support of the justice cause for Karen Reed and her family. And I would like to ask you guys, if you guys want to make comments and tell me what areas you'd like me to cover. I plan on covering Friday night a topic, including talking about what some other commenters are talking about, some of the attorneys are talking about on how they think the prosecution is doing. I'm really shocked to hear some prosecutors saying how that Hank's doing a great job, and it's really, really doing phenomenal work here. I don't think I'm going to do it tomorrow night, but I think Friday night instead. So, but you guys shoot me messages on comments here afterwards. If there's a topic you want me to cover, maybe I would jump on tomorrow night as well while my wife is working. So anyway, just looking over the comments now. All right, thanks. Going to sign off now.